Hello again. So, if you guys are here, it is because you took this time out of your busy day, your busy night, your children, your families to be here. So, we thank you for showing up and showing up for yourself. And if you're here, you might be in the midst of the divorce, thinking about divorce, starting the process. Maybe you're in that should I stay or should I go period. But for no matter what reason you're here, it's not because you failed. It's not because you're weak or you're broken or you did something wrong. It's because something inside of you deep down knows something isn't right in your life right now and it's not sustainable. And you're coming from a place of strength, not from a place of failing and not from a place of being broken. And divorce is a legal process, but it's so much more than that. It's not just a legal process. It's emotional and it's physical and it's deeply raw and deeply real and deeply human. So my intention today and our intention today as a group, as Vesta, is not to tell you what to do, but to help give you a little information to help you feel more informed, more steady, and less alone. And when we hop on here on our webinars each month, I like to give all of you just a moment to get grounded and to breathe before we get started, to take a break from maybe your busy day and the noise of your day. So you can sit wherever you are and get comfortable. You can close your eyes if you like. Nobody can see you because we can't see any of you on camera. So if you want to just close your eyes, open your eyes, however you feel comfortable, I'm just going to invite you to go ahead and get grounded now. So if your eyes are heavy, just let them be heavy. And let your body start to feel heavy in the chair, in the space that you're seated in. Let your feet get really grounded and heavy on the floor. Maybe you start to notice that you have feet. Maybe start to notice that you have hands. Start to let your body get a little heavier and heavier as your breath gets a little bit deeper and deeper. Start to notice any sounds in the room around you that you're hearing other than my voice. Maybe start to notice the temperature of your room. Just allowing yourself to take some time to be really with yourself and really present. If your mind starts to race and things start to come up, that's completely normal and human. There's nothing wrong. You're not doing it wrong. You're doing perfect. Now start to change your breath a little bit if you're ready. And we're going to take your breath into a 5-8 pattern. And what this breath does is it's going to signal to your nervous system that in this moment you're safe. So I invite you to inhale for a count of 5. If it feels okay to you, holding that breath in for a count of 2 and letting it exhale for a count of 8. And let's just stay with that breath at your own pace, at your own time for a minute or so here. Just in that 5-8 breathing pattern. Maybe we're noticing that we feel a little calmer, we feel a little more grounded, we feel a little more safe. Just let all of those feelings and sensations come in. And stay with that breath or going back to a more natural breath that feels comfortable to you. Start to imagine it's 2 to 3 years from now. Your divorce is over. You're happy, you're thriving. You're in the most perfect place in life you can imagine. Think about how that feels. Does it feel free? Does it feel peaceful? Maybe if your mind will let you go there, think about where you are, what time of year it is, what you're wearing, where you're living, what your day-to-day life looks like. And as you're picturing this, notice how it feels in your body. Does it feel light? Does it feel happy? Does it feel free? And whatever emotions and sensation those are bringing up, just let that sit there in your body for a minute, noticing it, maybe putting most of your attention on how it feels. And just letting that sit, that peace, that freedom. Maybe it feels like an exhale for a minute longer, staying with some deep breaths, so those 5-8 breaths, staying in the grounding space, holding, feeling that sensation in your body for just another minute, knowing that you are going to come to this place, knowing that you are going to get through this, knowing that you're safe, you're held, you're supported, and you're going to be okay through this entire process. And when you're ready, start to maybe let your hands move a little, let your feet move a little. Slowly, when you're ready, begin to open your eyes and come back to the room and come back to us here. Give yourself a few deep inhales and exhales. Give your nervous system a minute to come back to the here and now. And know that what you were feeling, that peace, that freedom, that happy place is there for you. You are going to be okay. And I know this process is a lot. It's exhausting, it's depleting, and it's overwhelming, but you are going to be okay. Divorce touches every single part of our lives when we go through it. It's legal, it's financial, it's emotional, and it's physical. So if you're having any or all of these sensations at any time, just know there's nothing wrong with you. It's okay and it's normal. And what you're going through now is just a stage. It's just a period of your life. And it's going to change and it's going to move on and it's going to be okay. A lot of the common questions I get asked when I first start getting on a call with somebody or first talking to somebody is, how do I file? How do I tell my spouse? What do I tell our family and friends? How do I talk to my kids? Am I going to be financially okay? Am I going to be able to stay in my house? And all these seem like logistical and practical questions are also very emotional ones. And you don't need to answer any of these or all of these today, but we're going to give you some information to help you get clarity around them. Every single step of a divorce is one step closer to the end. And you don't have to figure it all out now. We're not going to help make you figure this all out tonight. The key in divorce is to prepare. Preparation isn't about being aggressive. It's more about feeling supported and supporting yourself and having the right support for yourself through the process. It includes getting organized, getting your finances organized, making copies of every document you can find if you're not the one in your home that's in control of your finances. Even if you're taking screenshots of accounts, getting account numbers. If something comes in the mail that looks like it might be something that relates to something financial, even just taking a picture of the outside of the envelope. It's doing little things like changing passwords that you want to protect. Maybe your social media profiles, maybe things you don't want your soon to be exposed to get into. And then it's about getting clear on what you want and what you need through the divorce process. And in the beginning, it's about, what do you need to feel supported? What do you need to feel safe? What do you need to feel okay right now in this moment? And then acting on those and taking actionable steps to get there. And then when I work with clients, I really like to sit down and talk to them about, where do you want to be in a year, in 2 years, in 5 years? In the best case, best world scenario, how do you want this divorce to go? What does your life look like? And is that doable? And is that workable now and in 5 years from now? And that just gives you a little bit of a roadmap. It doesn't mean we're going to be able to create the perfect life and the perfect divorce based on that story, based on that scenario, but it gives you a place to start from. You're allowed to prepare for your divorce quietly doing all this too. You don't need to tell anyone. You don't need to tell your spouse. You don't even need to tell your family and friends if you don't want to. It's often where a therapist or a coach comes in to help you prepare quietly and give you that space and support that you need. How do you communicate through a divorce? Going back to, how do I tell my husband? How do I tell my kids? It can lower the conflict or it can unintentionally increase the conflict in a divorce. And here tonight, I don't know if I can give you specific ways to talk to your specific spouse or children because every divorce is so different. I work in a high conflict divorce space. I specialize in coercive control cases and cases where narcissistic abuse is present. In those cases, we have a safety plan. We create a very actionable, clear plan on how to tell your spouse. We role play it. We figure out where you're going to be. Make sure somebody knows that you're there. We make sure you're in a public space. But depending on your situation, you could need something entirely different. What is the same I find across the board in every divorce is you don't need the perfect words. The most important thing is you just need to be clear and you need to be calm when you talk to your spouse about needing a divorce and that being ready for a divorce. You need to feel very contained and regulated for you. Some of the best advice I can give you, no matter what type of divorce you're going through, is it doesn't have to be a long, lengthy, detailed conversation. I recommend under 10 minutes and 10 minutes being the max. It's not going to be the last conversation you're ever going to have. It's not necessarily the time to talk about details of a divorce plan or a lot of emotional reasons why the divorce is happening or a place to let a lot of the anger come out. It's just a place to let the spouse know that you're initiating a divorce, you've engaged an attorney, or you're planning to file. And then have a clear exit plan, have a conversation, and have somewhere to go. Leave, walk away, and let this really sink in with your soon to be ex spouse because they might be surprised. It might be the first time they're hearing about it. They might be expecting it, but it's going to hit them how it's going to hit them. And we're giving them some time to process this and allow this to hit them and their nervous system can create some space for deeper conversations to happen later. And it's also okay if you don't want to tell other people in your community, if you don't want to tell your family and friends right away. Relationships change and you don't need to give them a reason why. You're allowed to get divorced no matter why or what your reason is. It's your choice and it's your life. And sometimes it's really important, depending on your family and your community, to choose your privacy over trying to over explain and please everyone around you. I just wanted to talk before I turn it over a little bit about the feelings that come up during divorce and the emotions. Because it is not just a legal process and it is such an emotional process, you're going to have so many emotions that come up and they're going to change. They have no timeline, they have no clear pattern. But you will, no matter if you're initiating the divorce or maybe you're the one that didn't even want the divorce, there's a lot of grief that comes up and it's not linear. Grief is truly anything that's a broken hope, dream, or expectation. It's anything you wish could have been better, different, or more. So even if you're someone that's ready for the divorce, maybe you've already moved on with your life, this marriage was most likely something you at one point had hoped to be better, different, or more. So it's completely normal and natural to be feeling grief, anger, guilt, fear, and hope. Sometimes you're feeling all these emotions all at the same time. None of these stages happen in order. And as these emotions hit, it's so important to know that there is nothing wrong with you. It's real, it's raw, and it's human. Your emotions don't need to be fixed. And a lot of times when you start to feel these emotions, it's your body and your nervous system telling you it needs support. It can't carry it all alone anymore, and it's time to get support. One important part of the divorce process is understanding the process. And through the divorce process, there's so many options. You can mediate, there's collaborative law, there's litigation. There's so many options for you. And there's so many people on this team to help you figure out which one is best for you. The best path for you is nothing I can pick for you, but it's something we can educate you on and help you decide. The right path for you through the process of your divorce depends on your situation, your safety, and your capacity. And that's why having the right people and the right team around you matters. And what matters most is that you're not going through this alone because it is a stressful, depleting, and overwhelming process, and nobody should have to go through it alone. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Julie and to Marty to talk to you a little bit more about the different ways you can go through your divorce.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know Mandy loves to say that if you don't know who to start with all the different divorce professionals, it's often a great idea to start talking with a coach because, as you can see, Lisa can really help you when you're in, we call it the discernment period, if you're still figuring out whether divorce is the right path for you or not, and helping you make that plan. So, a coach is a really great starting place if that is you. So, Marty and I are going to talk a little bit about the different options that Lisa just referenced when you are starting out, because a lot of people have misconceptions. We see things on TV, we hear things from loved ones and neighbors with good intentions, but there might be some incorrect information or it might not apply to your situation. And just a little bit of a disclaimer, of course, because Marty and I are attorneys, that this is general information that we are offering to you. We're not creating any type of attorney client privilege or relationship. And Marty and I are both licensed in the state of Massachusetts. And so that is the framework that we're going to be speaking about tonight. But divorce law is state specific. So if you are joining us tonight from another state, please stay and welcome you to listen to the information, but you'll want to consult with somebody who's licensed in your jurisdiction. Okay, so now that's over, we're going to dive into the two main processes or ways that you can get divorced. So there's the traditional process, and then there's a constructive process. I'm going to be talking about the traditional process, and then Marty will dive into the more constructive and alternative processes that are available to you. So, the traditional process of getting divorced involves court and attorney advocacy. It is mainly a conflict based process that moves forward primarily in the context of court dates and hearings. And although almost all cases are eventually settled, settlement negotiations in this traditional process often occur under a lot of stress and sometimes literally on the courthouse steps or in the conference room or in a lobby. It's a high pressured situation. Clients in the traditional process often feel like they're being dragged through this process rather than controlling what happens. And these are probably some of the horror stories that you have heard. I know this might seem all like doom and gloom, but sometimes litigation is necessary if there's domestic violence or we need to obtain emergency orders, or if you're dealing with an opposing party who's just completely unwilling to communicate or compromise. In these types of situations, that is what the court and the judge are here for, to help move your process forward and to make decisions when you are stalled out. The constructive process, on the other hand, is more client centered and settlement oriented. The main types of constructive divorce are represented negotiation, mediation, and collaborative law. And I'm just going to touch on represented negotiation before turning it over to Marty. And I love represented negotiation. I do this often in my own practice. It's a settlement based process where each spouse hires their own attorney and the lawyers communicate with each other. We exchange financial information and we negotiate the terms of your divorce agreement. It's called a separation agreement in Massachusetts. Sometimes, when the lawyers are talking and trying to help the parties figure all of this out, a divorce hasn't even been filed in the court. They don't even know that you're getting divorced yet. So you can do this all up front and then end up filing an uncontested divorce, which is a great way to go if it's an available option for you. But this can also take place if you have filed and had your spouse served, and you might have even had one or two court appearances. There might be temporary orders in effect, but the attorneys are able to help the parties negotiate and come to a separation agreement and get you divorced that way. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marty to talk about some other options that might be great fit for you.
Thanks, Jolie. I'm going to talk first. I'm going to start with mediation. I think about the different levels in which to enter into this process. And as Jolie said, many of us think it has to be in the context of the higher conflict or more adversarial. But mediation is an opportunity for you and your partner, your soon to be ex partner, to come together to work with a neutral third party, often who's a lawyer. I know that's my role in this, who is not representing either of you, but our job is to help you understand the process and create your own agreement. So that agreement that Jolie mentioned, the separation agreement, that's what you need to file to get divorced in Massachusetts, uncontested. And the mediator will help you create that agreement. There, and it's a facilitated conversation in which you're going to be having discussions about the things that need to be agreed upon. And we usually look at it in buckets of, if there's children, we have to deal with the children, we have to deal with the assets, and we have to deal with the debt. And everything falls into these places. So the mediator will help you have these conversations to be able to come to an agreement. Now, one thing I like to say about mediation is people often think that we have to be amicable to be in mediation. And I would argue that isn't actually true. When I work with folks, I say the one thing that you really need is a willingness to come to the table to be able to be honest and have transparent conversations and be able to do the work. So we hold space for the conflict. And as Lisa was talking about before, all these emotions that are present, In a mediation session, you're able to have a container to be able to hold them and be able to, at least in my work as a mediator, be able to process them. So the goal at the end of this is to create an agreement that you guys can live with and that will be accepted by the court and will not have to go back and be changed. So that's mediation. And it is usually you or that you're you as the two clients and the mediator. And sometimes we work in a team-based approach. So you may have a coach like Lisa working on your behalf. Oftentimes you're going to hire your own attorneys. They're not going to come to the process with you, but they're going to be able to provide information and advice to you because when I'm your mediator or any other mediator that's a lawyer, we can't provide legal advice. So sometimes you really need to have independent lawyers review that and support you. But it's very different than litigation. And they're coming from a place, again, of adversary or non adversarial, but really more of this collaborative intention. We also work with folks like Maggie and Tom because the finances are complex. Selling homes, like the home might be your biggest asset. And we really want to ensure that any agreement that we create is going to stand the test of time. So bringing in these professionals as part of the team is really key. And I work with everyone on this team in cases as a mediator. So that's about the mediation process. The other process that holds things with a little bit more structure is called the collaborative law process. And so that's collaborative with what we call a big C here in Massachusetts, meaning all of the professionals that are part of that process have been trained specifically in collaborative law. You sign a contract at the beginning of it, all the professionals do, as well as the clients. So you have the two clients, you have a coach, and when I participate in the collaborative process, I act as the coach, as the person who's going to hold this space and be able to support both of the clients and move the process along. We also have the two attorneys, and the attorneys each represent the clients. But again, not from an adversarial perspective, but from a collaborative perspective with the intention to get everybody to an agreement that is what is in the best interest of all parties. And we'll usually have a financial person like Tom who actually sits at the table. So the really unique thing about collaborative law is we all come to the table together and have conversations at the same time and really work through the issues. So in the cases I've been involved in, people feel like it is a much more deliberate process with everybody, the roles clearly defined and outlined. The one thing I will say about collaborative law is when we sign that agreement at the beginning, we all agree that if the process breaks down and somebody has to walk away from the table, all of the professionals walk away. If it turns to litigation, it starts over. So you're not going to have the same team. That's an incentive to keep people staying with the process to really stay through these hard conversations, these tough moments, and be able to get to the other side. So those are the two more alternative topics or alternative processes to be able to get yourself divorced in Massachusetts.
And I don't know about you, Marty, but a lot of people come to me and they want to know what is the right option for me? Like, how do I know if I'd be a good candidate for mediation or should I file first? And there's lots of questions that people have. And I'm sure people who are attending tonight, there might be in this stage of figuring out like what is the right path for them. And unfortunately, we can't give you a one size fits all answer because it's different for everybody. But I generally say that it's a really great place to have a few consultations with some people, with some attorneys or some mediators. Do your due diligence and ask questions. And all professionals have a different flavor, a different flair, a different philosophy that they bring to family law and to divorce specifically. And you want to make sure that they're a good fit for you. And I just like to remind people that you may start out on one path and finish your divorce on another. So you might, like I said, file your divorce and then end up negotiating a settlement. Or you could try to mediate with your spouse with all the best intentions and it might blow up and you might need to file after that. We don't know. All you can do is try the best that you can, get the information that you can, and just adjust as the path unfolds and how things are, you figure it out along the way. How do you answer this question, Marty? It's a tough one.
Yeah, I think I do a lot of discovery call or consultations with folks and really talking about what it would be like to be able to do this process. And I do it with both parties, absolutely for me. And they don't have to be together answering all the questions so that people fully understand. And I get into very clear descriptions about what this process looks like so that people are prepared. For some people, the thought of sitting at a table across, and I do it virtually as well, but really even being in the same Zoom room or being at a table and having these conversations directly with their ex soon to be ex partner is too much. They can't, their nervous systems can't regulate that. I've had some of those cases may be more appropriate for collaborative, or maybe they're going to go into negotiated settlement. There's all sorts of different, as you said, we've talked about the different ways to do it. And I think it's just important to get as much information as you can. And I endorse interviewing different folks and really getting a sense because we're all so unique and do it differently. There's no one size fits all for anyone.
Another question that we get a lot is about timelines. Like, how long is
Mhm.
this going to take me? And unfortunately, Massachusetts, many other states, divorce is a lengthy process. And especially if if you're litigating, and we are subject and at the mercy of the court and the judge's calendar. And I just like to say that when you file for divorce, the court won't schedule your first court appearance. We call it your pretrial conference, unless you file a motion in the meantime, for at least 6 months until after you filed for divorce. So, just to give you an idea that this is not usually like a quick and dirty thing, like it takes time. It's definitely an exercise in patience. And that's one of the reasons why it's so helpful to have people like Lisa on your team that you can work through, because it's going to be probably longer than you anticipated. And if you're mediating, and I mean, you can speak to this, Marty, you're really more in control of your timeline, right? Can you talk about how your process works and the length and timelines and all that?
Yeah. So for me, I like to really do mine. I have a standard that I try and adhere to, but it really depends. But generally, you can expect up to 5 sessions. Sometimes it takes a little bit less. Rarely does it take more. And we do them. I usually space mine every 2 weeks. I find that's a nice cadence. It's not extended too far out, but I also don't want it so close together because again, we're talking about difficult things. We may need to do some things in between. You need a little bit of time to re-regulate yourself and be able to do what you need to do. So I found like an every 2 week cadence. So it could take at max 10 weeks. In my world, that's the best case scenario, to little over 2 months. Sometimes it takes longer if people aren't that motivated. Not that they're motivated, but the schedules and things like that. I've heard of cases with mediation going on a year. I don't understand that. In my mind, that just it blows my mind that someone would be in this process for that long. Collaborative law takes a little bit longer because you're actually trying to schedule a lot of people's different schedules. When you think about it, trying to get 6 people's schedules in alignment. That's the biggest challenge I find with collaborative law. So that process is going to take a little bit longer. But in the end, it is way less than litigation. I just had a client that I did some other work with, not in mediation, but she just got her divorce last week after 5 years.
Mhm.
5 years, and they really weren't fighting over much, but it just took that long, and we are at the mercy of the court, and it's a really lengthy, frustrating, and expensive process, as we know. I know that's another question is, like, general expenses. Everybody's different, everybody has hourly rates, attorneys still generally work on hourly rates. I do more of a flat fee for the mediation work that I do, so that is gonna my philosophy is people should know what they're paying up front, understand what they're getting, and it really helps keep costs contained so that we can do this. Litigation is very hard to do because you have no idea, and you can certainly talk more about that, Jolie, but you're paying 2 attorneys typically, you're paying for time in court potentially, all these things that are out of your control, and it can add up very quickly, very quickly.
I definitely agree with you, Marty. And I know my clients want to know at the outset of their case how much I estimate that their case and how much their legal fees are going to be. And I wish I could give them an answer, but unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how many court appearances we're going to have. I don't know if we're going to have to do extensive discovery because the other
Mhm.
side isn't cooperating. There's so many unknowns. And obviously, the longer the case is going on, the more work your attorney is doing on your case, the more expensive it is going to be. I like to tell my clients to prepare for at least like ten to $15,000 at minimum is probably a good estimate for a typical divorce with a few contested issues. But if we have contested custody issues and we need to have a guardian ad litem appointed, it could skyrocket from there and it really can get unwieldy very quickly. And I just want people to note that even when you come to your agreement, because we were talking about timelines and if the court approves it, you're still legally married there's a waiting period that's set by statute in Massachusetts. So if you file an uncontested divorce after your court hearing, you're still legally married for 120 days. That's 4 months. If you do a contested divorce, you're still legally married for 90 days after your court hearing. That's 3 months. So even when you think you've gotten to the end of the whole process, there's still like a little waiting period. You don't have to go back to court or anything, but
Mm.
that's when you are legally divorced and your divorce is final. With that, I mean, I think there are some questions in the Q&A, Marty, but we might want to save to the end so we can get to
Yeah.
some more of our friends. But for now, we're going to pass it over to Maggie. Thank you.
Thanks, Jolie. All right, guys. I love hearing. I learn something new every time too. Every time I hear Marty and Jolie and Lisa talk, no matter what type of divorce path you're going to be taking, myself as a certified divorce lending professional can really help you make some of these decisions. And today's call was really about building your exit plan, right? And I noticed by the poll that a good percentage of you are in that considering divorce or separation stage. And so you're really just like putting together all that information. What do I do? Hearing these different avenues. How do I even talk to my soon to be ex about this? But one of the things that comes up is the real estate, right? So about 70%, 70 to 80% of divorces involve real estate. And a lot of times the biggest question out of that is, can I stay in what we refer to as the marital home? Or somebody may be thinking they want to exit the marital home, but they want to make sure that their spouse could maybe stay, right? That's most common, the biggest question with the house. And so my job would be so certified divorce lending professionals like myself, we are loan officers who have a special certification. So if you think out of the 200,000 mortgage loan officers in the country, only really 1% of us are certified in divorce lending. And it's my pleasure to help you really look at, can you afford it? So the things that my job to help you look at, and we can do a free 30-minute consultation and kind of decide if it makes sense to work with me. We can also do just like a pre-approval. But the goal is really to help you look at, could you afford or could the spouse you're leaving afford that mortgage? Looking at your income, maybe you're the spouse who has worked, yeah, stayed at home. Sometimes people are working from home and they're returning to the workforce. How long before that income can be used? People will ask me, can I use the child support or alimony to qualify for a mortgage? So we would talk through that because depending on what program we're using, we might be able to use it as soon as 6 months, or we may need a little longer. And then depending on how old the children are, if they're like 15 and older, it starts to get a little challenging on using that child support because it may be ending when they're 18. We talk through all of these things. And the if you're building your exit plan right now and you just want to figure the math part out, it's helpful to talk with me. And then Tom's going to be talking next as well. And really do as much homework as you can ahead of time to get your numbers together. We'll talk about your credit. How good is your credit or how poor is your credit? What kind of debt do you have? How is that going to impact your affordability? A lot of people just assume they're splitting debt down the middle with their spouse, and we can talk about that as well. And do you have student loan debt versus car loan debt? All these different things, right? So my job would be to sit with you and really go through that planning I do work with either just with one spouse, or I'll work with couples as well. So especially if you're going through the mediation process with Marty, I could be a part of that where I'm working with both of you and making sure you're both set up for success. Or I'm working for just one of you and I'm really just looking at your specific situation. And if it's to the point where it has to go to court, we do a full report that really can be help with the when you're going to court for the judge to see what you can or cannot qualify for. So that is my passion, is helping you through navigate that. I'm gonna turn it over to Tom, and he's oftentimes I'm turning sending my clients over to Tom because we work closely together. Sometimes we're weighing in on each other's the client situation and going back before we really finalize the number. Tom, I appreciate you. Turning it over to you.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes, I love collaborating with you as well, going back and forth on the various clients. I'll talk about that in a little minute, how that works for us. But yeah, so the title of this call, obviously, get what can you do to get your exit plan in order? It can be overwhelming. There's a massive list of financial considerations. I'm not going to scare you. I'm going to read a list, but I'm not going to scare you, because what I want to tell you is you bite this off in bite-sized chunks, and that's, I think, really important. There's nowhere you're going to tackle all of this at once. I'll give you an example of the list. For example, the financial documents you might be asked for. I'm just reading from my book here, but last year, 3 years of tax returns. I'll explain why that's important in a minute. W-2s, 1099s, corporate returns and statements, payroll stubs. That one's pretty important. Social security statements, life insurance, checking and savings account statements, investment statements. The list goes on. Mortgage statements, real estate valuation. It can be overwhelming. So I just want to underscore that's why you need to put a team together to help you with this. If I sent someone off with that list of 30 different financial bits and pieces, they'd never come back to me. We get these documents together in real time. And a big part of what a CDFA does is help you understand, once you've gathered all those assets together and formulated a budget for yourself. Budget is really important. I'll talk about that in a second. Once we laid that all out, you want to be able to understand the value of your assets, various assets, and understand what the value of those assets after taxes, right? So a lot of times we'll see in divorce, one spouse, 80% of the time, one spouse is going to be the financial person in the household. They've got a leg up. They're more in tune with the finances. Sometimes you'll even see one spouse works in finance, the other doesn't. My job is to get everyone on the same page, level the balance sheet. That might be sole representation, or it might be collaborative, as Marty talked about, a collaborative divorce where people come, they're transparent, we lay everything out. But if you were to start, and I would say set an agenda for yourself that, look, I can't tackle this all at once, but let's say this week I'm going to set myself the goal of gathering my tax returns. Why are tax returns important? Tax returns are important because you'll glean a lot of information about different accounts in there, not all accounts, but some accounts, some benefits. Your spouse might have got certain pension benefits, restricted stock units, etc. There's a lot of information to be gained from tax returns, and I would gather those from your accountant for the last 3 years. I think the paychecks, there's a lot of important information there on the paychecks, what you're paying in terms of benefits, etc., other kind of bonuses, just understanding the income of you and your spouse. That's important. After that, I would start to really try and figure out what your budget is. So what your budget is right now, and I have plenty of spreadsheets on that. I can help people work collaboratively to figure that out. There's a lot of quirks, like making sure you don't double count certain expenses, etc. But understanding your budget is important, not just for the event. I don't see divorce as just an event. I see it as an exit into a transition into the next phase of your life. Same as a certified financial planner would help someone figure out what their financial lifestyle is going to look like in retirement, or if they've sold a business, exited a business and sold it. I want to understand what your financial life is going to look like many years past the divorce, because we want to ensure that you don't just get a divorce as a transaction. You want to make sure that lifestyle that you end up with is sustainable. For example, if you take the house, that's great. Okay, you came out maybe well out of that transaction, but let's look at the ongoing costs of that house, the maintenance, what the market is versus renting, all those considerations. We want to make sure that you don't run into a liquidity issue or run out of money 5 years from now. I want to be able to help you understand, do you need other sources of income, maybe a part-time job, something additional, rental income, whatever it is to fill that gap and make sure you have a sustainable plan so you're not going to run out of money a few years from now. And this is why I love working with these professionals here, because I'll start with, for example, working with Marty in the collaborative divorce cases. We spend a ton of time envisioning what that lifestyle will look like for the couple, who's going to live where, who's going to visit when, who's going to maintain which house. That's all. We're building that picture of that future lifestyle. And then I build a picture of what those expenses will look like around that. And then likewise, working with Maggie, we go back and forth. For example, recently we the case I worked on where we had someone that wanted to keep the marital home and buy out her husband from the home. We put a ton of work together in figuring out, was that feasible? It was feasible. Maggie was able to get them approved for that. It was definitely doable. She laid out the different options. But then we started thinking about, I was able to figure out, okay, we can buy that house out, but probably don't want to hold that longer than 5 years. It'll get a little expensive. So this is the kind of planning we do for many years beyond the event, not just the transaction itself. But in terms of getting organized, that's where a CDFA comes into play, helping you gather those documents bit by bit. It really can be overwhelming when you look at the list of everything you have to put together. But people like myself and the people on this call are here to help with that. And again, break it down into little chunks, a little bit at a time. You're not going to do it all in the weekend, that's for sure. I do free 30-minute consultations. At minimum, you should try and buy my book. I don't really make any money off it, but it's got plenty of checklists there, things to think about in terms of gathering all the bits and pieces together. Again, understanding what your assets are worth, things you mightn't have thought of, airline miles, club dues that are paid for by a corporation, will help you figure out what those assets are worth, make sure nothing gets overlooked, etc. And again, the value of those assets after taxes is really important. 100,000 sitting in CDs is not the same as 100,000 in a 401k or an IRA. The 401k and the IRA are going to have a lot of taxes on them eventually. I want to help you level the playing field and understand exactly what you have and what it's worth. So I think I've talked plenty here, but feel free to reach out. Free 30-minute consultations, as I said. Love to chat to you. I have empathy for people going through this situation as I've gone through it myself. Back to you, Jolie.
Thank you, Tom. It was wonderful. I'm going to invite all of our experts to come back on, and we're going to move into our question and answer portion. We've been answering some of the Q&A throughout the session, but please feel free to keep adding questions there, and we will try to get to you. All right, it looks like there's a couple in here that might be in Lisa's wheelhouse. Lisa, there's a question. Is it okay to tell them in your virtual couples counseling, spouse is emotionally reactive and I feel better with someone as a witness?
Absolutely. It's okay to do that in a virtual couples counseling. A few questions I would have that I know you can't answer, but for you to consider is, are you in the same home in different rooms? If so, if you're in the same home still, I would just make sure you have a safety plan if there is abuse and emotional abuse. Making sure a friend knows this conversation is happening, or a family member, or a coach, or a therapist. Depending on your personal situation, I also often alert the police at the non-emergency phone number that this conversation is happening. I call, and you can call for yourself, and I just say my job. I say I have a client at this address. This conversation is going to take place about this time. And could they just be around the area? The police are typically very happy to help in those situations. And again, if you're in the same room with your spouse still, have a plan for later. We don't know how they're going to react once you tell them. Your counselor is just on a screen. They are not there in the room with you. And once you hit end on that call, they are gone. So we want to make sure you're not on the phone with them that night. You want to at least have a plan to leave the home if it escalated, because your safety is the absolute most important thing. And a lot of times in these situations, it's once you tell them you're leaving that it gets really dangerous. So just, and that's not to scare you, it's just making sure you have everything organized and in place and ready beforehand.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. There's another question. Could you talk about the difference of telling a spouse that I'm going to file or filing first and then informing them? Lisa, this might be a good one for you to start with.
And I think, again, I hate to keep saying it depends on the situation, but it depends on the situation. Is it safe? Is it secure? Are you still in the same? Sometimes people are separated, living apart when they do this, even if they haven't told them that they want a divorce. So it's so specific to your situation. I would almost invite you, without knowing the difference, to close your eyes and sit with it and notice how it feels in your nervous system when you say to yourself, I'm going to file and then tell them. How does that feel to you in your body? Or I'm going to have the conversation. There is absolutely no harm in filing ahead of time. If you are ready to go, file. You can file your divorce and then have the conversation. Maybe you want to have the conversation before they're served to soften the blow a little bit, to soften the conflict. But again, I'm always leery to answer these in these type of situations because I do work in a DV space, in a high conflict divorce space where there's a lot of coercive control. So it completely depends on your situation. If whoever asks this question wants to reach out to me, I'm going to leave my email in the chat. I will do a half-hour complimentary call with you and we'll help you unpack it and figure it out, just so we make sure you're safe and you're in the right place. So I'm going to drop my email in here now.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. And I know I do a lot of conversations around this topic with my own clients when we are deciding whether to file and conversations to have with their spouse or the timing of that. And I agree that it is definitely case specific. Sometimes if you have that, if you give them the heads up, that can be like a sign of good faith that you want to start out this process like open and transparent and hopefully set a good foundation for some constructive conversations and negotiations to come. But in other situations, there are concerns that possibly if you say you're going to file, that maybe bank accounts will be drained, or there's been some kind of financial mismanagement or some other kind of funny business going on. So it definitely is case specific. And one thing that I like to mention is that when you do file for divorce and when you have your partner served, there are automatic restraining orders that go into effect that just automatically happens once your partner is served. So there's an automatic restraining order on finances. So no one's supposed to be draining bank accounts or selling assets or making any big financial moves without agreement of both parties. And also parties can't just kick people off of insurance, like health insurance or car insurance. The court really tries to like nip those things in the bud before they even happen. So there are some automatic protections in place. So I just like to mention that. Another thing is that when you file for divorce, the other side doesn't know unless they're like going onto the court website and checking like the court dockets every day to see. They're not going to get notified until you actually serve them with the summons. And when we get the summons, we have up to 90 days to have the other side served. So it doesn't have to be like a very like quick thing. It's not like we get the summons and serve the other side right away. At least in my practice, we talk with our client, we make a plan. We're like, okay, are we going to give them a heads up? Are we not? And we make that plan ahead of time. So this is something that you'd want to talk with your attorney about. Let's see. Here's a financial question. How can I get financial documents, tax returns, life insurance, pay stubs, etc., if my spouse has been the one who has completed the taxes online and has handled all finances? It would be odd for me to ask for copies of their pay stubs, and I don't want to let them know I'm planning on filing. Our communication has completely broken down, so having an open conversation about it is not an option. Got any thoughts, Tom? Or Lisa, anything?
I would say this is a lot in your realm, Jolie, but I would say someone like myself can help you find out as much as you can by looking online, looking into taxes, all that, etc. The stubs, whatever you can get your hands on. It's a breadcrumb to develop. And I can start thinking about, okay, someone did something a year ago, they bought this, how was that funded? Where did that money come from? But there could be a point, as Jolie, where you've got to subpoena records and you can. I will say I've seen extreme cases where one spouse took every financial statement out of the household and took off with them. So left no information. And I think we should probably talk about the role of a forensic person as well too. And we can help introduce there if you really need to. Situations can get tricky. If you can't get what you want from the subpoena and people, even that doesn't work, I think the forensics are important too. And we see all kinds of situations, people moving money overseas, getting involved with crypto. Really hard to trace that. There's a whole knowledge base around that, how that works as part of divorce, tracking the crypto. So we have the resources to connect you with to try and track down that information. But Jolie, I'll let you talk about the subpoena process and getting statements from someone who's not playing ball.
Yeah. In
Well,
Massachusetts, when there's oh, sorry, Maggie, did you want to jump in?
oh, I wanted to share too that if for something like taxes, if you're not the person that normally does it, you can log into your irs.gov portal and you can see all of your filings there. So that might just be a way to start. And then also just like working with someone like myself and Tom to get your own finances all together and everything that you know about yourself will help you know that list of what you really kind of need to figure out for your spouse. And maybe we'll be able to help you realize things you might not have thought of, 401ks, prior companies, and be talking through all that to help you come up with that list as you're building this exit strategy. Because if we just can help you figure out your situation, it'll help you feel prepared when you do go and file or let this person know that you're divorcing, then you'll feel like you've done your homework and you won't feel as because as Marty and everyone says that once your nervous system's all unregulated, it's harder to do those things. So yeah, so we're here to help you come up with that list and at least figure out your own stuff. But irs.gov is a good place to start.
Yeah. I should mention Social Security as well. Sometimes you don't need to get your spouse's Social Security statement. For example, I often can figure out, okay, that spouse made over 150,000 for the last 20 years. He's gonna or she's gonna get 5,000 a month. You're entitled to half of that if you've been married over 10 years. This kind of thing, we can help you understand so you don't have to go to battle for every single document. But there will be ones that you will need, and that's where we pull in people like Jolie to really drop the hammer and start chasing down that paperwork. I'll let you talk about that, Jolie.
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, if you file a divorce in court, then there's automatic documents that it's required by the court to be exchanged. So your most recent 4 pay stubs, 3 years of all of your bank statements, retirement statements, investment statements, certain healthcare and health insurance information. So all of that is required by the court to be exchanged by both parties. Now, sometimes the other party isn't, Tom said, playing ball or being transparent, and we have various discovery tools at our disposal. We can send subpoena directly to different financial institutions, and that's why Lisa mentioned, like, even if you see something come in the mail from Fidelity or E-Trade or whoever the institution may be, even if you have a screenshot of that and we know the name of the institution, we can send a subpoena to them to get the records directly from them. We can send things called interrogatories or requests for production of documents. We can take depositions. We can bring in forensic accountants, like Tom mentioned. So there's lots of tools that are at our disposal. Of course, those come at a cost. So we try to start with things that are more cost effective. We can also file motions to compel with the family court and have a judge order that they have to turn over specific things. So there are options, but the short answer is the other side is supposed to be providing certain information to us. And if they don't, then typically the judge isn't very happy about that, and that won't reflect well on them in court. Okay. Another question here. Are high conflict personalities able to work with a mediator or work in the collaborative process? Marty, you want to take this one?
Yes. So I'm going to piggyback off what Lisa said is it depends, right? A lot maybe 10 years ago, people would have said no, like these are not cases to go to mediation. And just as a little bit of background, I spent the majority of my career as a litigating attorney working in domestic violence. So I'm very familiar with these cases. And so if you hire a mediator who is experienced in this and understands how this works, it can work. And the same with the collaborative team. When I do mediation, I have a form I ask people to fill out. It's a very extensive form for a lot of things I need, but some are about what this relationship is like. And I know the questions to ask so that I can really understand what's going on underneath. And again, it doesn't mean we wouldn't necessarily mediate, but it just depends on, and I always talk to both parties so that I can make really informed decisions. But not every mediator is trained in this and doesn't have a background around this. And that can be more harmful than helpful. I believe that people should have the right to have access to this type of process, which again is more cost effective and is on your own timeline and you're making decisions. But in cases where there's a high level of danger, such coercive control that one party is unable to be able to make decisions on their own, it may not be the best. But again, there's ways to protect. If I was working on a case with Lisa as the coach for the party who was maybe not the controlling one or the abusive one, and with the other person getting whatever support they need, we would have a better chance at that. So it's not an absolute no, but it's a maybe yes with a lot of qualifiers and a lot more information is how I look at it. And with the right person as your mediator.
You want to add anything to that, Lisa, since this really is what you do?
Absolutely. So I 100% agree with Marty. It depends. I hate to keep saying that, but it depends on you. It depends on your case. It depends on your partner that you're divorcing. If you have the right mediator, it can be a very good option, especially with the right support around you. If you don't have the right mediator, it doesn't go very well. My suggestion is always make sure your mediator is also an attorney or has a background as an attorney in these cases. And also have your own attorney to help you review your documents, which I really recommend for everybody that you have your own person because your mediator is there as a neutral party. They're not there for you or your soon to be ex partners. I always recommend that, but it's extra important in these cases. If you can find
great.
to do one without it. I'm always surprised when some do, but to make sure they are an attorney because there's a lot of people out there meeting that don't have the experience as a family law attorney.
And an attorney, though, with background in some kind of domestic violence and coercive control training, because it's not mandatory for family law attorneys. It is mandatory for judges in theory, but for family law attorneys, we do not have to have domestic violence training. It's not a requirement. So really understanding who the professional is you're hiring, what their background is around this is really important.
I couldn't agree more. Jolie and I were talking about the other day. I don't know if we were just talking or if we were on a podcast but sometimes when you mediate, it's actually better when you have the right team because when you're in a coercive control relationship, when there's narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse, these types of people will try to use the court system against you. And for some reason, they always find the meanest, nastiest attorneys that kind of reflect their personality. So mediation, you end up having more control over your case. And Jolie can speak a little more to that. They were literally just talking about this, I think. But they will use it. They will file unnecessary motions. And I'll let Julie speak a little bit more to what the legal side of that as to why that is. But it can work in your favor in those cases to have a mediator.
Yeah. So in a lot of cases, once the parties aren't living together and an abusive partner can't exert that kind of control over their partner anymore, they'll continue their post-separation abuse through the courtroom. We call it litigation abuse. So they'll file tons of unnecessary motions. They'll bury you in unnecessary discovery. And all of this is to cause you aggravation, to make you feel scared, to increase your attorney's fees. And so, like, court to them is like their playground where they can just unleash their control over you. So if you take the abusive partner out of that court context and put it in the context of a mediation where you have a trained mediator, you're actually leveling the playing field if you have those conditions that you've been talking about. A lot of people, like Marty said a long time, like 10 years ago, they would say, no domestic violence, coercive control, don't do mediation. But I actually think that it's a much more nuanced conversation nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay, question here. If you kicked your spouse out 2.5 years ago and they've lived at a family member's house all that time and still have paid the bills all the same for the home, once you tell them you want a divorce, can they force themselves to live back in the house during the divorce? I guess I will answer this question. It sounds like a legal question to me. So, if the marital home, I mean, if the property is the marital home, typically both parties have a right to be there unless there's a restraining order or you have an order from the family court saying that you have sole use and possession of the home. So the short answer without knowing more details is yes, they theoretically could come back into the home and you would need to file a motion or get a restraining order to get an order saying that you have sole use and possession of the home. So that is that one. Are we required to live in the same house during the divorce process? Anyone want to take this one?
Yeah, no, you're not required. You're definitely not required to. And in fact, it's very difficult. A lot of times people have to because there are not other options. But I think the question we get a lot is, if I leave the house, is that going to harm me in the divorce? And the short answer to that is no. It's still a marital asset, and that doesn't change when one person leaves. So you do not have to live together.
I would
Are
think
they?
one thing on that, if you're leaving, and sometimes people will be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna leave the house, they can figure out the bills and all that stuff." And just keeping up on any credit payments, especially the mortgage payment, is so important. So if you are the one like leaving and you're on that mortgage, even if you're not on the mortgage, making sure that mortgage is getting paid is going to be good for both of you. Making sure each other's credit stays healthy just makes it so you both can be successful afterwards. Definitely no drama with moving out and not contributing to that. And to my 2 cents. Yeah.
One thing I would just mention is before you move out, if you do have children, I would caution you against doing that, just making a rash decision. You want to make sure that you have some kind of agreed upon parenting schedule before you leave the home. And I would just encourage you to talk to an attorney about that. Okay, are they required to keep paying the bills with the restraining order? I think this is in reference to what I was talking about with those automatic restraining orders that go into effect on finances when you file. And so basically with those restraining orders, everything with finances is supposed to remain status quo. So bills should continue being paid how they were typically paid during the marriage. That doesn't mean that people always follow these rules. And sometimes people will stop having direct deposit into an account, or there might be things that throw everything into chaos. And so that's when the attorneys would step in and work together to try to get a new status quo. And if that's not possible, then we have the option to file something called a motion for temporary orders, where we get orders from the court saying who is going to be responsible for what bills while the divorce is playing out. But in theory, everything should remain as it was during the marriage. If you tell your spouse you want a divorce and they drain money out of the account before you officially file with the court, is there no way to recoup that? The answer to this is there is a way to recoup that those were marital funds and that was still part of the marital estate. It's not a violation of those automatic restraining orders like I talked about. So you couldn't file a contempt and have them found guilty of violating a court order, but it's still considered in the overall distribution of the marital estate. So it's not like you've just lost that money because you didn't file in time. It will be. But I will note, sometimes they go to pay off like joint debt, and then you would have been responsible for that anyway. So there's some nuances that go into that. But the shorter answer is no, it's not like it's gone forever and it will be considered. It just, who knows what capacity that will be. Okay. Personal/mental health issues. I have treated chronic anxiety, etc. Stuck. Not sure if divorce Personal therapist versus divorce or Vesta divorce coach, which or both for addressing my issues productively, relevant or not? So I think this person is asking that they're having a tough time and they're choosing between a therapist or a divorce coach. What do you have to say about this, Lisa?
Again, I think it depends. It sounds like you have some mental health concerns happening. And depending on where those lie, what you're doing, are you taking medication? Are you seeing a therapist? Or are you seeing a therapist regularly? You can never have enough support. I would never ever tell anyone not to see a therapist because a coach and a therapist do work in a different capacity. I think it's great to utilize both. And again, because I can't really speak to specific situations on here without having more details, my email is in the chat. You're more than welcome to send me an email and I will schedule you a complimentary call to help you figure it out, just so we make sure you're getting the best support that you can get right now for yourself through this time.
Somebody wants to know if we can work with people that live in Texas. I will say, at least for Marty and I, we have to be licensed where we practice. So that Texas is out for us. I don't know about you, Maggie. Do you have to be licensed where you work?
I can do the CDLP in any state, and then also as a loan officer across country, we are nationwide. So either way, yes, I can help.
Great. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I have clients all over the country, 12 different states. You can have less than 5 clients in one state before you have to register there, except for Texas. You can have 1 client. So anyone wants to be my first Texas client before I have to register there, I'm up for that.
Great. And Lisa, I know you work with people internationally, right? All over the world.
Yeah. I work all over the world.
Yeah, great. Tom, somebody asked, do you have any recommendations for apps for budgeting? Or are any of those apps good? Are they just
I saw that and I did a little research earlier today, and names like Quicken and Minted came up. And I've used QuickBooks and Quicken and Minted before. Minted, I didn't stick with it. So I'll be honest, I'm not going to try and sell anyone on that. I thought it was good. It's just, it wasn't my jam to be that granular. I think you can do a lot with a spreadsheet and working with a CDFA potentially. Sit down, put your budget together and figure out what that's going to look like. Kind of big picture. You can get really granular if you want, but I find that 95% of people, if they can figure out their annual budget, pro and con, plus or minus 10,000 or 5,000, they're going to be most of the way there. And I think you want to run that by a professional, because there's things you're not going to think of. Your budget today is going to be a lot different from when you're divorced. You might have someone to help with the yard or help with clean the inside of the house. Things are going to be different. You might need to pull in other professionals.
There's a question. My husband is going to want 50-50 custody. I am the primary caregiver for our 2 children. I've been working part-time on and off since 2017. He wants the kids to live with him 1 week on, 1 week off. How does the court view this? I guess I will start with this one, and Marty, you can chime in too if you have thoughts. 1 week on, 1 week off, a parenting schedule. Typically, the court orders that when the children are a little bit older, because kids have a very short attention span when they're younger. And so going a whole week without seeing the other parent usually doesn't happen until they get to be like preteens or teens. But the court will take into consideration what was the division of the parenting responsibilities during the marriage. So if one parent was a stay-at-home parent or primary caregiver, then, the court's going to consider that in determining what's in their best interest. Would that be to continue a similar arrangement so there's not too much transition or disruption for the children? So it's going to depend on a variety of factors. Unfortunately, I can't really give you a concrete answers. One thing about family law is that judges have extremely wide discretion, and we can have a case with facts and present it to 2 different judges and get 2 different outcomes. I would definitely recommend you speak to an attorney about this, but those are my thoughts on this initially. How about you, Marty?
Yeah, I think that's generally true. And again, we just don't know every judge, every day. It's very different. And so really trying to, the standard is best interest of the child. So that is a very subjective standard.
Yes. If you and your spouse each took out separate credit cards only in each of your own names a year ago with various personal and home charges on them, are you each responsible for just your debt on each other's cards when divorcing? I don't know who wants to take this one.
I think that, yes, we're looking at that, right? That if it's for you guys, you're still married, right? Is again, it depends. They're still married. And especially if it's for regular expenses for the home, you could be. The answer is you could be potentially,
Yeah.
potentially.
We haven't talked a ton about credit, but just be aware as well after divorce as well. If you're joint on a credit card or a loan with your spouse or your ex, the credit company doesn't care. They're going to come after both of you because it's still a joint debt. So post divorce as well, or as part of the divorce decree, ideally you're paying off those debts before you divorce, but just be aware if you stay on that joint, they don't care that you're divorced. They can come after both of you because it's still joint credit. So you part of the divorce process, working with Jolie and Marty, etc., to be keeping that clean before you exit it into the next phase of life.
We just have a couple minutes left. One question: if we decide for the divorce to be 50-50, do you still get child support? I'm assuming this person means a 50-50 parenting schedule, so it's a shared parenting schedule. In Massachusetts, even if parties agree to a shared parenting schedule, if there's a discrepancy between the parties' income, then one party could still end up paying child support to the other. We'd have to run the child support guidelines and see what that number comes out to, but it is possible that even with a shared parenting plan, there's still child support being paid. Just really depends on the numbers. All right. I think we
There's one last question, Julie, about filing a domestic violence case 3 years ago, canceled the process before the court date, thinking things would get better if you file again. Can the previous filing be used as evidence? And I think this might be not, we could only talk it to Massachusetts. I don't know about other states, how they do that. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So everything that has happened prior to your divorce is relevant and can be introduced as evidence. One thing with domestic violence, especially, is we know from statistics that it takes an average of 7 times for a survivor to finally leave an abusive situation. So it's not uncommon that you might have started a case or had a restraining order, and there might have been previous criminal charges that have been dropped, or they were like you reconciled and moved on. That's not uncommon, but it would still be relevant to your divorce case, especially when it comes to parenting time. I will say that most divorces in Massachusetts are filed on a no-fault basis, meaning that bad conduct by the parties doesn't typically affect what the ultimate division of the marital estate is going to be, except in some certain circumstances. But yes, as evidence, it happened during your marriage, and it can be talked about and discussed and considered by the judge. Do you have anything to add on that, Marty?
The one thing I want to add, just because there's been some specific questions around abuse and domestic violence, is that anytime someone is considering divorce, it is a risk factor for heightened safety concerns. And so I would highly recommend that you speak to somebody that specializes in this. There's a national domestic violence hotline. I've been giving the number out all week. I should remember it. But when there's also local domestic violence programs, as I said, I spent most of my career working for a few of them here in Massachusetts, and they're wonderful. They have free hotlines. They have advocates who are able to answer your questions to help you safety plan. Sometimes they have legal resources depending on where it is, but I would highly recommend anybody that's experiencing this to have a plan around how they're filing, and not just the specifics we've talked about, but your own personal safety plan. And I know Lisa mentioned that a little bit, but that is just really important.
Said. Thank you, Marty. We are at time.
Oh,
Maggie,
sorry.
yeah, did you want to add one final thing?
There was one more question in there regarding, and I just think it's good for the group. It says, is it best to have stable income before you actually divorce? Or if the relationship is toxic but not quite abusive, do I need to stay put until I have reliable income? And obviously, like Marty just mentioned, if there is a abusive situation going on, you do want to address that. If you might not think you're stable and you are, so I always say it's never ever too early to talk with us, any one of us, from that income and stable. Tom and I can look and help how stable, because you might think you aren't and maybe you are, right? Or let's come up with a plan. I always tell people when I'm pre-approving them that I never say no. I always say not yet. And then we come up with the plan, right? So it's never too early to figure that out and don't just assume that you're not stable. Was my
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah.
I would echo that. It could work both ways. People think that they're all set up and they're not really, and we figure out there's a gap and you have to pull some income. You're going to have to find ways to pull in some income longer term. And it goes the other way. You might think you're stuck, you're in a rut, but our job is to find solutions for you. I've been lucky no one's ended up eating cat food on my watch. We found some solution one way or the other. So touch wood. It will never happen. But yeah,
I know yeah. I was
yeah.
just gonna say, I know we've been talking a lot about abuse cases tonight, and there's a lot of misconceptions in this area where people will say his money, her money, your money, my money. But in the court's eyes, whatever either spouse owns or has is part of the marital estate. It's your money, it's the party's money. And you may not be able to access that, but there are things that you can do if you file in court to get orders to allow you access to those funds, to hire an attorney, to pay your living expenses, to get child support, to get alimony. There are options. You may be a stay-at-home parent and not have any access right now, but I would encourage you to speak to somebody, and there may be more available to you that you might just not realize yet.
It could be a pension, for example, right? Your spouse has a pension. You could end up splitting the net present value of that pension, for example. Some people might be out there under the illusion, okay, that's nothing I can touch, or I won't see that money for 30 years. Talk to the professionals about that. Yeah.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you all so much for sticking with us through to past our end time. We appreciate your participation. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's presentation. Please take the call from the concierge tomorrow and take advantage of all the links that we've put in the chat to connect with us. We're happy to speak with you further, and we're rooting for you, and have a great night. Bye.